In 1996, during the original development of Resident Evil, which was still not released at the time, an idea of a prequel came up shortly, especially after the peripheral and the console of Nintendo 64 was announced in 95. Capcom decided during this time that they were going to make a cartridge-based Nintendo 64 game, and was started basically as Resident Evil 0. In addition to that time, Resident Evil Code Veronica was shown around 2000, looking to be a cartridge-based game, surprisingly enough. 64 megabytes though was the total amount of data on a cartridge-based platform. The script and the development and everything ended up for Resident Evil 0 being done by the company Flagship, which would eventually be absorbed into Capcom later on in its years when it would cease to exist. The Nintendo 64 prototype edition of Resident Evil 0 would only be shown as a prototype video, which you can find online, but was the only clue that the cartridge-based game still existed. Around the year 2000, it was announced that the production for Resident Evil 0 would shift onto the new platform from Nintendo for the Nintendo GameCube. As you can see with all the graphics included with the game, it's very similar as far as the Resident Evil Remake that was also made for the platform on two based mini discs. This game was very divided as it was released in the year 2002 in North America and Japan, and the results of this was very kind of mixed. Even though for the fact that Resident Evil 0 itself, the gameplay is actually very similar and sticks to be very impressive as the Resident Evil Remake, many people were a little bit divided on the new mechanics, especially related to the partner mechanics. Obviously with Resident Evil 0, Billy Coen and Rebecca Chambers were the stars of the show and had the ability to get the player to switch between the two, removing the idea of actual item boxes and using items to be dropped and picked back up by either or, and also using different mechanisms to transfer items. If they were obviously in the same room, you could easily transfer, but there were other things that allowed them to transfer it between different areas if the two were ever separated. Obviously Resident Evil 0 focuses a bit more on Rebecca Chambers that shows up in the original Resident Evil game. But where is Billy Coen? Billy Coen is basically stuck in this one prequel entry of Resident Evil and is really never mentioned again, nor is he ever shown. Personally, I like the Biohazard 0 little mini Nintendo GameCube versions of these. Resident Evil 0 also released in Japan a trial edition, which actually had showcased some of the demo of the Resident Evil 0 series, with this thing focusing on the train and the train segments, all the way up to the Scorpion boss. You find a number of zombies, you find a number of dogs or Cerberus, and there's no mention, no showing of story when it comes to the captain of the Alpha team, as well as a whole lot of CGI videos that are shown, and is very limited in its showing. It does have a few changes and differences as well, which makes this a very unique demo if you so choose to play it. Of course, just like mentioned in the previous video, in this one, Resident Evil 0 also was part of the HD Remake Origins collection for newer platforms. This is still accessible to this day onto Steam, PS4, even eventually PS5 whenever it does come out. But like in the Origins collection, it's definitely got a bunch of new remakes and updates. It also has the ability and additional features of a Wesker Mode that was included, but ultra-wide ratios and 16:9 widescreen editions, and a few other things that were touched up, such as the models and textures. The Albert Wesker mode, you get the ability to play Albert Wesker instead of Billy, and you can move quickly using his special attacks that are showcased in Resident Evil 5. as well as even his eye laser ability, with an interesting kind of extended lore of Rebecca Chambers shown being mind-controlled from Wesker, showcasing the same mind-control device that is on Jill Valentine in Resident Evil 5, which makes an interesting story element. I've never seen a more divided showcase of Resident Evil 0. Many folks have very much a problem with some of the new mechanics and taking a little bit away from the original mechanics of Resident Evil. Personally, I don't think it really affects me too much. It's still very horrific, it's still intense, and the textures and the environments as well as the experience is still full of horror that I'm so used to with these models. Rebecca Chambers also is a wonderful character that does pop up in the original Resident Evil remake in the same model as Resident Evil 0. Rebecca Chambers is interesting and a fun character mainly because as a child prodigy of knowing medical expertise, almost in the case of being a doctor as she later becomes, fighting against these biohazardous materials and issues and problems of the world in the future CG movies if you ever get a chance to watch them. But what's interesting about Rebecca being so young and mature for her young age in Resident Evil and Resident Evil 0, the wonderful output of morality, innocence, devotion, loyalty, as well as standards of trying to be the best STARS RPD officer ever and to live up to the name of serve and protect, medical expertise, as well as her abilities of still being trained as a police officer. It's a shame we don't get to see more of her in other areas. However, if you do get a chance to play Dead by Daylight, Rebecca Chambers does show up, as well as Wesker, Nemesis, Jill, Leon, and a few others to note. But even some of the alternative skins and costumes from these previous concepts are shown. I recommend if you haven't played that and you haven't gotten included with Dead by Daylight. But thank you for your time. Thank you for sticking around on this review for Resident Evil 0. And I'll catch you in the next video.